Hey guys, tonight we slip into the damp, dim corridors of Victorian London, where the street lamps burn low and the fog wraps itself around your coat like a slow, stubborn cat. You feel the slick cobblestones under your boots, each one slightly uneven, as though conspiring to catch your heel, and the soft hiss of gaslight overhead seems to dissolve into the mist. Somewhere, a carriage wheel clicks over a loose paving stone, and you almost mistake it for the steady tick of a clock. You probably won't survive this if you came here for action-packed heroics. This is the kind of journey where time stretches, every breath feels cool and heavy, and even your own thoughts take their sweet, unhurried route to the surface. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you right now? And what time is it for you as you listen now? Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The streets smell faintly of wet wool and coal smoke, a mix so ordinary for the 1870s that you barely notice it. Your breath hangs in the air in tiny bursts, catching the pale orange glow of the lamps before vanishing into the fog. You pass a wrought iron railing beaded with moisture, fingertips brushing cold metal, and notice the faint reflection of your own shadow stretching across the street. London at night has a strange rhythm in these hours far past the busy clatter of evening markets, but not yet into the quiet certainty of dawn. There are footsteps, always footsteps, sometimes close enough to make you wonder if they're keeping pace with you, sometimes distant enough to fade into the soft scrape of the fog against stone. Victorian Londoners knew insomnia well, though they didn't always call it that. Sometimes it was wakefulness or night fevers, terms that sound almost poetic, but were often said with a kind of weary surrender. Historians still argue whether sleeplessness was truly more common back then or simply more noticed, since quiet nights and slow clocks gave you fewer distractions from your restlessness. As you drift deeper into the city's heart, the gaslight above flickers, casting the brick walls into sharp relief before softening them again. A passing hansom cab rattles by, the driver hunched against the chill, a lantern swinging gently beside him. You wonder if he, too, is part of the city's sleepless crowd, men whose nights are carved into long, steady loops from one end of London to the other. You catch a whiff of something green unexpected in all this coal dust. A memory rises the market stalls from earlier in the day. Neat heads of butter lettuce stacked like emerald bouquets, and a whisper you overheard from a vendor about boiling the leaves for a rest cure. You tuck that thought away for later, like a bookmark between pages. The fringe stories of the era suggest that in the deepest hours, you could wander almost anywhere without drawing suspicion, provided you didn't look too hurried. An unhurried walker, coat buttoned neatly, might be mistaken for a clerk on late duty or someone returning from a respectable supper. The hurried ones, though, those drew eyes. And so, you keep your pace even, unthreatening, letting the night swallow your movement as naturally as it swallows the thin ring of carriage bells in the distance. A lamplighter emerges from the mist ahead, tall ladder balanced across one shoulder. His boots make a muted thud on the stones. his free hand clutching a little can of oil. You watch as he tips the ladder against a post, climbs halfway, and tends to the light with the quiet precision of someone who's done it 1,000 times. For a moment, the two of you share the same pocket of warmth spilling from that freshly adjusted flame. The air hums faintly here, not from machines or traffic, just the living sound of the city breathing in its sleep. Somewhere, a cat knocks over a bin, and the hollow rattle echoes along the row of houses. A door opens, then shuts quickly again, releasing a puff of warm bread and milk scent into the cool. It lingers in the fog just long enough to remind you that inside these houses, people are curled under quilts, dreaming or trying to. Not everyone will sleep tonight. Some will lie awake and count the ticks of the mantel clock, their minds spiraling over unpaid bills, unanswered letters, or the faint cough in the next room. Others will wander, as you do, and find that the city feels strangely more yours when it is empty, when even the river seems to move slower under its own misty blanket. You reach a corner where the gas lamp's reach barely touches the cobblestones, and for a moment you stand in near darkness. The faint rasp of your coat's fabric against your wrist sounds louder here, and your eyes adjust slowly, picking out the faint glow of another lamp further ahead. Each step feels deliberate, as though you are not merely walking, but sinking into the hour, into the history, into the quiet lull that might just trick your restless mind toward sleep. And so, you keep walking, the velvet fog pulling tighter around you, the midnight streets leading you onward into the deeper folds of the night. The street narrows, the fog thickening until the opposite wall is only a smudge of deeper gray. You press on, guided more by the memory of where the road bends than by anything your eyes can see. Somewhere ahead, a clock strikes 3 deliberate notes, with long pauses in between, as if the mechanism itself is half asleep. Inside, behind lace-draped windows, you imagine the world you can't see: drawing rooms with their curtains pulled tight, faint firelight leaking into the shadows, chairs angled toward the hearth, and tables littered with the half-forgotten remains of tea. Somewhere, a biscuit has gone stale beside a saucer, the steam from the cup long since vanished. The muffled tick of clocks fills these rooms, their pendulums swaying like the slow breath of the house itself. Victorian parlors could be still to the point of oppressive, every sound magnified. The creak of a floorboard upstairs could sound like a rifle crack in the hush, and the faint sigh of wind in the chimney might send shivers through even the most level-headed listener. Historians still argue whether the Victorians' obsession with keeping curtains drawn was about privacy or about managing temperature in their notoriously drafty homes. Either way, the effect is the same. You out here in the cold can sense lives unfolding just beyond a thin layer of fabric and glass, while they, in there, remain unaware of your passing shadow. It's in these drawing rooms that insomnia took root for many a strange, quiet affliction made worse by the lack of distraction. No glow of a radio dial, no television hum, no electric light to fool the body into thinking it's still evening. Just the shifting flame of a candle, the slow dimming of an oil lamp, and the mind left entirely to itself. For those awake, the hours stretched. Some picked up a book, though by lamplight the pages could seem to blur quicker than the mind could take them in. Others stitched, letting the needle's steady rhythm pretend to be progress toward rest. And some sat entirely still, counting heartbeats or trying the old trick of breathing in time with the clock's pendulum, a method as tedious as it sounds, and therefore occasionally effective. You pass a house where a dim glow still flickers in an upstairs window. A shadow moves slowly, deliberately perhaps tending the fire, perhaps pacing the floor. You imagine the polished walnut mantle beneath their hand, the faint smell of beeswax from freshly polished wood. Maybe there's a photo frame there, or a painted miniature, lit just enough for the eyes to linger on when sleep won't come. The air out here smells faintly of roasted chestnuts, carried on some stubborn breeze from a vendor who hasn't yet given up for the night. Your stomach grumbles, though not with true hunger, more with the faint ache of knowing you won't be eating until morning. Still, you follow the scent for half a block, just to see. On a quieter street, a small dog noses through the fog, its collar bell faintly jingling. The sound reminds you of the tiny bells sometimes attached to tea caddies in households terrified of servants stealing leaves. Oddly enough, there's an insomnia cure in there somewhere. One lesser-known theory claimed that the faint, repetitive tink of a bell could lull the mind if placed near the bed. A fringe notion, to be sure, but in an era where lettuce water passed as medicine, it hardly seemed stranger than most. You pass by an unlit library, its high windows black squares against the night. Inside, the air would smell of leather bindings and dust, a scent so thick it seemed to cling to your clothes. You picture those stiff-backed chairs, the kind that made you sit straight enough to feel every vertebra, yet somehow, paradoxically, coaxed some sleepless visitors into brief, awkward naps. Maybe it was the silence, or maybe the sheer boredom of staring at the spines of parliamentary reports did the trick. The cobbles here are damp enough to reflect what little light there is. You step carefully, the slick stones just waiting to remind you that balance is a privilege of the well-rested. Your breath joins the mist again, curling and folding into the air, and you notice that even the city's usual smells, coal smoke, damp stone, stale beer from a tavern somewhere, are muted at this hour. The only constant is the ticking, whether from a watch in your pocket or an unseen clock behind a wall. Time asserts itself in small, persistent ways. Some found this comforting. Others found it maddening. You're not sure yet which camp you fall into tonight. Somewhere far off, a door closes with a muffled thud, the sound swallowed quickly by the fog. You keep walking, the rhythm of your steps matching the slow beat of the night, your mind softening at the edges, not quite drowsy, but drifting there by increments. The fog lifts just enough to let a pale ribbon of moonlight slip across the street ahead. You step into it, your shadow stretching thin and almost transparent on the cobbles. A few more steps and you catch a scent so faint you almost doubt it green. Watery, a little earthy. Lettuce. Not the crisp, chilled kind from a grocer's icebox, but the soft, loose leaves from a Victorian kitchen garden, picked before dusk and set aside for more than just salad. The practice was simple: boil lettuce leaves in water, strain them, and drink the liquid warm. It sounds harmless enough, just vegetable tea. Really, but for a certain subset of Londoners, it was a trusted remedy for those long, unbroken hours staring at the ceiling. Mainstream medical books of the 19th century actually mention lettuce's mild sedative properties, though they didn't dwell on the details. And yes, it's true, modern science later found compounds in lettuce that might have a tiny calming effect, but back then, the belief alone was often half the cure. You turn down an alley that smells faintly of wet brick and last night's rain. Somewhere above, a shutter bangs softly in the breeze. In the distance, a door opens and closes, and a faint rattle of crockery follows. You imagine someone inside, pouring the strained lettuce brew into a chipped porcelain cup, steam curling into the low lamplight, hands wrapping around the warmth as though it might coax sleep into the bones. The fringe version of this cure, the one that probably raised eyebrows even in its own day, involved adding a splash of something stronger to the lettuce water. Sherry, perhaps. Or a drop of laudanum if the apothecary wasn't watching too closely. This wasn't exactly doctor-approved, but in a time when sleeping drafts could contain anything from alcohol to opium, a greenish vegetable infusion was positively wholesome. Historians still argue whether lettuce water's popularity was genuinely based on results or simply because it was cheap, easy, and free from the more dangerous side effects of the era's chemical remedies. It's one of those debates where the lack of written complaints might just mean that no one thought it worth documenting, not that it actually worked. You pass a narrow doorway where a cat slinks out, eyes gleaming in the gloom. It regards you for a moment before vanishing between two barrels. The smell from those barrels fermenting cabbage and old rainwater is enough to make you quicken your pace until you're back on an open street. In your pocket, your fingers find the edge of a folded scrap of paper. You don't remember putting it there, but somehow it's there all the same. You picture the neat Victorian script. It might hold a recipe for lettuce infusion, measured in handfuls and gills, or perhaps a line from a book urging patience for all ailments of the mind. Time and stillness are the chief restoratives. The lamps here are spaced further apart, so you walk long stretches in shadow. It's quieter, too, almost oppressively so. You find yourself listening for your own heartbeat, and for a moment you imagine sitting in one of those parlors you passed earlier, hands cupped around a steaming mug, feeling the bitter green taste coat your tongue. A street vendor's cart comes into view, abandoned for the night, with a few limp leaves of lettuce still clinging to the edge. You think about the day's earlier bustle, the cries of fresh cause, fresh butter, and how quickly that noise has drained from the city. It's not so different from the way insomnia drains the warmth from your own thoughts, leaving them pale and a little limp until rest finally returns. A pair of boots clack somewhere ahead, then stop abruptly. You see no one when you round the corner, but the sound lingers in your ears like the echo of a thought you haven't quite finished. You keep walking, because in this part of the night, stopping too long makes you feel like the fog might grow around you and set you in place. You pass under a lamppost, its light turning the damp cobblestones into patches of liquid amber. For a moment, you can almost taste that lettuce brew in your mouth, warm. faintly metallic from the kettle, the bitterness fading into something softer, and you wonder, not for the first time tonight, whether the cure is in the lettuce or in the ritual, the measured steps to the kitchen, the quiet sound of water heating, the steam curling upward like a private signal to the mind that it's time to let go. The street bends again, and the scent of coal smoke returns, heavy enough to push the greenery from your thoughts. Still, you keep the image of that cup in mind, like a lantern you can carry further into the night. You find the library by sound first, or rather, by the absence of it. The city's damp hush congeals into an even deeper quiet as you push open the heavy door, the brass handle cold and faintly tacky with polish. Inside, the air smells of leather and dust and something like dried tea leaves. A scent you've already met outside in dreams, the perfume of long-handled mops and old bindings. Gaslight hangs in milky globes from dark ironwork, smearing the room with a gentle, buttery glow that refuses to cast any sharp edges. After the slick cobbles and velvet fog, this softness feels like stepping into a wool-lined box. Chairs, rows and rows of them, straight backs, polished arms, feet worn into little cups by generations of heels. You run a finger along one rail. It's smoother than bone, more honest than any cushion. You lower yourself, easing into the seat like you're making a bargain with your spine. It doesn't exactly hurt, but it advertises the idea of discomfort so persuasively that your muscles begin to relax out of sheer diplomacy. Nearby, a clerk's coat hangs on a peg, sleeves drooping as if even the garment has dozed off. Victorian reading rooms were designed for moral seriousness, which is to say, for sitting upright and keeping your lungs and your conscience in good order. The British Museum's grand circular reading room opened in 1857, its dome an echo chamber for rustling pages and cleared throats, and many municipal libraries followed a similar grammar of quiet, straight-backed civility. That's a mainstream fact you can feel with your shoulder blades. These chairs don't cradle you, they correct you. And yet, paradoxically, this corrective posture has a sedative whisper. When your body can't fidget its way into coziness, your mind sometimes decides to wander toward the nearest exit, and sleep is the most convenient door. You place your hat on the table, careful not to scrape. Across from you, a man in a rumpled waistcoat studies a parliamentary report with the devoted misery of someone who has promised his employer to find a decimal point. He blinks long, slow blinks like someone who tried lettuce water earlier and found it better at making steam than sleep. In the far corner, a woman pretends to read a moral tract but has actually propped it in front of a little notebook where she's sketching lamps. The lamps are all shaped like moons. Every few minutes, an attendant glides by in squeakless shoes, glancing for contraband sandwiches or open conversation. Your own breath sounds like speech here, which is inconvenient when you're trying not to speak. The chair itself offers a peculiar kindness. The seat is firm, the back upright, the wood faintly warm from earlier occupants. There's a rhythm you discover after a few minutes, shoulders down, jaw unclench, eyes soften. The print enseigne in front of you, some geography of river tolls, melts into a pattern of vertical strokes and dots. You hold the book open with one hand, but your attention sloshes free of the letters, drifting to the lamp's steady hiss. It's the same hush you heard under the lamplighter's ladder, only civilized, the city's breath domesticated. There's an anecdotal cure in this room, one whispered among office clerks and students who can't afford fancy drafts if you can't sleep. Go to the library and let the chair do it. Not dramatically, not flopped over like a cat. Sit properly. Pick the dullest bound volume that ever wore a number and read until the words stop being words. Then keep reading. The chair, the hush, the respectful heat, they conspire to fold you down by degrees. It's less a nap than a surrender. Fringe-minded devotees swear the oak itself has a calming virtue. The tannins, they say, give off a scent that settles the nerves. There's not much evidence for that beyond the testimony of people who like the smell of old sideboards. But you file it beside other gentle oddities like the lettuce brew, lavender pillows, and the bell on a tea caddy lull. Historians still argue whether gaslit interiors improved late-night reading or, by thickening the air and confusing the body's sense of time, quietly worsened insomnia across the city. You can see why the debate sticks. These globes throw a kind light that seems tailor-made for calm. But the room's air does grow heavy, and the window panes, kept mostly shut against drafts, hold in a stuffiness you can almost bite. Maybe the cure isn't the light at all. Maybe it's the rules. Sit here, be quiet, read slowly. Boredom as prescription. Not the first time in history rules have tried to tuck you in. Your mind, contrary thing that it is, finds comfort in small rebellions. You let yourself recall the clink of the kettle and the green scent of lettuce water, as if imagining the ritual might be enough. You think of the drawing rooms with their curtains drawn tight, the mantel clocks that count so solemnly you want to yawn in self-defense. You remember the lamplighter's careful climb, the quick flare of brightness as he coaxed the flame, and wonder if he ends his rounds with a library chair, too, letting the night leak out of him into polished oak. A soft scrape, someone pushes back a chair. Instantly, every head in the vicinity lifts like wary birds. The offender, cheeks pinkening, eases the legs back into their indentations as though fitting stone into an old foundation. The attendant drifts by again, expression perfectly bland. There's a rumor, less attested but too delicious to ignore, that certain London libraries kept a discreet wake-stick behind the desk, an item librarians might tap against the floor to rouse a dozer without the scandal of words. You can almost believe it, watching the way the room's silence is gardened like a fernery. You turn a page you don't remember reading. The paragraph is about river dredging. It might as well be about cloud classification. It may actually be about nothing at all. The clock above the catalog desk whispers with a steady pendulum click, and you find yourself breathing to its measure, the way you imagine people doing in those warm parlors. The trick begins to work, not because it's clever, but because it's dull. You swallow a smile, one of those small inward jokes you promise not to share out loud, thinking that future doctors will give this a fancy name, like sleep hygiene, while you simply call it sitting very politely until your brain gets bored. From the street, a late cart rattles by hollow, distant, the sound softened to felt by the brick. The gas globes hum. A page rustles 3 tables over. The man with the parliamentary report tilts, writes himself, tilts again, like a skiff on a windless tide. You've seen drunks perform with greater dignity, but very few drunks have managed to do it without moving. If the attendant had a wake stick, now would be its moment. Instead, only a single cough rises, floats, and disappears, the room absorbing it like sponge cake takes tea. You close your eyes for a breath and picture the apothecary's shelves, bottles lined up like a choir of glass, measuring spoons winking, labels promising nights full of respectable nothing. But there is a reason you came here rather than there. The library sells a cheaper draft silence, and silence supervised by furniture turns out to be surprisingly potent. You open your eyes again and glance at the chair's arm, where a faint notch made by a century of rings and fingernails catches the light. It looks like a tally mark. 1 more hour surrendered. The attendant pauses by your table. You meet eyes for a half second. The shared agreement that you are absolutely reading this riveting report on toll gate schedules with all your wits about you. They move on, unconvinced but merciful. That's the unspoken contract of the place you may borrow the chair for its intended purpose. And if the purpose turns out to be rest disguised as research, well, so long as you don't snore, there's no snoring allowed here, not even quiet. Handsome snoring. You checked the sign. It doesn't say that, but it says that. Another mainstream note hums along the rafters. The Public Libraries Act of 1850 expanded, later planted reading rooms like this all over Britain, spaces meant to elevate, educate, and keep people out of mischief after dusk. Their strict quiet, their steady warmth, and their hard chairs were features, not bugs. They trained bodies to be still and minds to be orderly. And if some portion of those minds slipped down the back stairs into drowsiness, no one wrote a pamphlet against it. The city had plenty of places for wakefulness. There had to be 1 or 2 where sleep could sneak up from behind. Your thoughts drift. You imagine taking the train just to nap. Remember the empty carriage you pictured earlier, rocking like a cradle on rails, and how the library offers the same motionless sway. You think about the street musicians you sometimes hear outside at 2, their fiddles folding into the fog, and how a melody gets boring in the best possible way after the 10th repetition. You think of hot bricks wrapped in flannel and tucked beneath feather quilts, and of lavender sachets, and of a bell tinkling softly on a tea caddy in some anxious household. Remedies pile up like books until you can't tell which one eased you and which one simply gave you something to hold. Your head tips. You catch it. You arrange your face in an expression of fierce interest. The paragraph on dredging seems to have begun again without asking. This time the words blur faster, linking arms and leaning into the white space. The hiss of the gas globe grows friendlier. The chair's back is no softer than before, but your bones have made peace with it. The room, a bowl of warm silence, invites you to float. You let your gaze slide out of focus, settle on the mid-distance where the lamplight thickens into cream. Someone turns a page. Someone else caps an inkwell with a sound like a tiny door closing very far away. Your breath lengthens, finds the library's slow pulse, And for a weightless second, you can't tell whether your eyes are closed or simply unbothered by being open. If sleep is a stray cat, this is the posture that convinces it to approach stillness. No reaching, no sudden interest. You think, briefly and fondly, of the lettuce water again, that green, earnest effort, and of the lamplighter's gentle patience, and of drawing rooms where clocks beat out the same argument in favor of surrender. Then you think nothing at all, not even of the chair, which has become the floor of a shallow sea. The library keeps watch. The city breathes. The fog presses its face to the glass and fogs it further, like a child. And you, upright, polite, perfectly dull, begin to drift. The air outside hits you like a damp wool blanket, cool, but somehow heavy, smelling faintly of burnt lamp oil. You've left the library's stillness behind, and the soundscape widens in an instant. Out here, the city breathes in layers, the shush of the fog against brick, the click of your boots on the cobbles, and, somewhere just out of sight, the faint clatter of metal on metal. Up ahead, a lamplighter tips his ladder to one shoulder. He's shorter than the one you saw earlier, bundled in a patched greatcoat, with a cap pulled low against the mist. His other hand carries the oil can, its spout glinting briefly before it disappears into the gloom. You slow your pace, letting your steps align with his route. There's a comfort in shadowing someone who moves with such measured intent. As you follow, you notice the little ritual at each post ladder up, a quick climb, the faint scrape of a hook adjusting the lamp's glass, and then that tiny, satisfying shh as the wick takes the oil. A brief flare of light, warmer than the one before, spreads across the fog like a secret being shared. He pauses to watch it settle before climbing down. You catch the faint scent of paraffin, sharp but oddly clean, mingling with the damp air. The lamplighter's profession, mainstream historians will tell you, was not just about illumination, it was about order. In an age before street lamps were automatic, this was a twice-daily choreography, timed to the shifting hours of daylight. There's even record of lamplighters doubling as night watch informants, quietly noting which houses stayed lit well past midnight. Historians still argue whether this was formal policing or simply idle gossip passed between shifts, but either way, the lamplighter's gaze carried further than his flame. He moves on, his boots leaving dark, wet prints on the stones. You fall in behind, crossing a street where the fog thins enough to reveal a grocer's window, half shuttered, with a basket of fading lettuce in the sill. The sight loops you back to that steaming green brew you've been picturing all night, and you wonder whether the lamplighter has tried it, whether he ever comes home from these damp, oil-scented rounds and pours himself a cup before bed. A hansom cab rattles by, its lantern swinging like a restless pendulum. The driver doesn't look at you, but the horse does. Briefly, ears flicking forward before returning to the road. The sound of hooves on stone overlaps with the faint clink of the lamplighter's tools. For a moment, the noises braid together into something almost musical. You catch up enough to see his breath in the lamplight, small clouds rising and vanishing into the mist. He stops at another post, balancing the ladder with practiced ease, his silhouette stretching tall against the glow. There's something hypnotic about the repetition. Climb, adjust, pour, flame, descend. It's a metronome in human form, marking the night in increments of oil and patience. A fringe anecdote claims that some insomniacs would follow lamplighters deliberately, pacing the city until the repetitive act lulled them enough to finally head home. It's not hard to see why. There's no urgency here, no jostle, just a slow looping path from shadow to light. Shadow to light. You imagine your own restlessness being trimmed away one post at a time, left behind like the faint soot clinging to each lamp's glass. The lamplighter stops mid-step, glancing down an intersecting lane. You follow his gaze but see nothing, just deeper fog, the faint ghost of a window's glow. Without a word, he turns and keeps walking. You match his pace until, at the next corner, he pauses to adjust the ladder's weight and nods at you before disappearing into the blur. The nod says, "You know the route now. You can take it from here, if you like." You don't. You let him fade into the mist, his steps growing fainter, the last flash of his oil can catching what little moonlight filters through. Alone again. You feel the city close back in not oppressively, but like a quilt being tucked along your shoulders, somewhere behind a row of shutters. A clock chimes the half hour. You pass a drain where water trickles steadily, its sound hollow and oddly steady, like a tiny clock of its own. Your mind folds this rhythm into the lamplighter's ladder scrape and the cab horse's hooves, building a sort of drowsy symphony from the night's practical noises. At the next crossing, you pause beneath a freshly tended lamp. The glass is warm to the touch, a thin shell holding back the cool air. You close your eyes for a second, feeling the heat seep into your palm. It's easy to imagine standing here until the warmth fades, the fog thickens, and the next round begins. The thought is comforting in a way you can't quite name, like knowing the world will keep moving in small, steady loops, whether you're awake to see it or not. You step away at last, leaving the lamp to guard its little circle of cobblestone, and let the street lead you deeper into the night. The street bends, and with it, the scent changes coal smoke, giving way to something lighter, almost floral. You slow your pace, letting the air guide you, until the source appears a modest row house with its shutters drawn, but a faint glow leaking through the seams. The aroma, soft lavender, slips out into the fog in gentle waves, so deliberate it feels like the house itself is exhaling calm. Inside, you picture a narrow bedroom where the fire is no more than embers, and a woman in a lace nightcap tucks a small muslin sachet beneath her pillow. Lavender, sewn into fabric, a common and respectable remedy for restless minds. Mainstream household guides of the Victorian era listed it among the quieting herbs, fit for both genteel parlors and the bedside table. The scent was meant to soothe frayed nerves, to push thoughts into softer shapes before sleep could take them. Whether it worked or not, it certainly made the air more pleasant. A knock echoes faintly from the next house along, and you catch a whisper of voices, a neighbor visiting at this strange hour. The exchange is quick, almost furtive, and you catch only fragments. Tried it. Half a spoon. Told me it helps. You imagine they're talking about one of the more questionable home cures. Perhaps warm milk with a pinch of nutmeg, or the odd fringe recommendation of onion syrup. Yes, onions, boiled down with sugar until they could be sipped like medicine, sweet, sharp, and, if nothing else, distracting from whatever had kept you awake in the first place. Historians still argue whether the popularity of such perfumed and flavored remedies came from genuine belief in their medicinal properties, or simply from the comforting rituals they created. It's one thing to swallow a bitter draught from the apothecary. It's another entirely to be handed a little cloth pouch sewn by a friend, or a cup warmed between caring hands. You drift closer to the lavender-scented house, catching sight of a sliver of candlelight through the drawn curtain. The shadow of a hand moves adjusting the pillow, perhaps, or setting a small book aside. You can almost hear the creak of bed springs, the faint rustle of a quilt. These moments, quiet and unseen, are the ones that lace the city together after dark, tender acts aimed at coaxing sleep out of hiding. Further along the street, the scent fades, replaced by the sharper note of camphor wafting from another doorway. Camphor, too, had its believers kept in little jars or dissolved into liniments, sometimes used in poultices said to draw away the restless humors. The smell is bracing, even medicinal, and in the fog it takes on a ghostly coolness, as though the air itself were mentholated. You pull your coat a little tighter. A faint clink draws your attention to an open window, where 2 teacups sit cooling on the sill. Beside them, a small vase of dried roses, brown-petaled but still faintly fragrant, leans toward the street. Perhaps those cups held lettuce water earlier in the night, or chamomile, another standby of the sleepless. Or perhaps they held nothing more than hot water, the warmth itself the only thing asked of them. A fringe anecdote, tucked into a few period diaries, tells of whisper cures where a trusted friend or relative would sit at the bedside and speak softly, recounting the day's dullest errands or reading aloud from the most repetitive passages in the Bible. The point wasn't the content, it was the steady, unhurried voice, the low vibration that seemed to draw the listener under like a tide. In some households, this role fell to an elderly aunt. In others, to the patient spouse who had already surrendered to the fact that their own sleep would be sacrificed for the night. You pass a narrow alley where laundry lines stretch overhead, ghostly shirts and sheets stirring in the night air. The smell of soap lingers faintly, mingling with the last threads of lavender you carry from earlier. There's something about these clean, faint scents that works on the mind in ways no apothecary formula can match. Reminders of order, care, and the predictable turning of daily life. The fog thickens again, swallowing the outlines of buildings, and you're left walking through a softened world where scent becomes more certain than sight. Lavender, camphor, soap, and underneath it all, that steady coal smoke heartbeat of the city. Your steps slow without you deciding, and for a moment, you feel the same drowsy sway that comes in a library chair or a train carriage, the world moving just enough around you to make stillness tempting. A carriage rattles somewhere far off. You pause to listen, the sound folding neatly into the quiet like a bookmark slipped into a page. Somewhere behind you, a door closes softly, and the lavender is gone from the air. You carry the memory of it anyway, tucked away like a sachet beneath your own imagined pillow. You follow the trail of lavender and lamp oil until a brass plate appears beside a narrow door. Surgery by appointment. The script is tidy, the kind that promises both discretion and a decent chair. Inside, a bell tinkles a gentler cousin to that tea-caddy bell you remembered, and a hallway opens into a consulting room lit by a coal fire whose embers glow like small, polite suns. The first thing you notice is the doctor's silver watch, round and bright in the lamplight, ticking with the same self-importance as every clock you've met tonight. It rests on the desk beside a blotter worn to silk by decades of serious notes, and it seems to keep 2 times at once the steady march of minutes and the slower, softer pace of sleepless hours. The doctor is neither young nor old, a man smoothed out by years of listening. He gestures you toward a chair, firm, upright, suspiciously reminiscent of the library's best efforts to reform your posture, and asks, in a voice that never rises above the fire's whisper, how long the wakefulness has kept you company. You talk about the fog, and the lamplighter's ladder, and the way a library chair can be so stern it lulls you anyway. You mentioned the lettuce water you've been thinking about, how the steam smells faintly green, how the cup warms the hands even when the mind refuses a truce. He nods the way doctors nod when they approve of harmless rituals. He sets a stethoscope to your chest, the polished wood kind, a tidy trumpet that carries your breath across the small distance to his ear. He listens. The room listens too. When he's satisfied that your lungs sound like lungs and your heart like a metronome that only occasionally drinks too much tea, he leans back and watches the coal's orange eye. Keep regular hours, he says gently, as though this were a new invention. Rise with the light. Walk every day. Eat plainly at night. Ventilate the room. Sleep hygiene. Long before anyone calls it that. Mainstream medical advice of the era, delivered like a lullaby, less excitement after dusk, fewer heavy suppers, a brisk circuit of the park when the fog behaves. He inquires about coffee and tea, and has the grace to wince at his own hypocrisy as his cup cools on a side table. Moderation, he decides, and don't read anything that makes you feel clever after 10. You promise, silently, to avoid parliamentary reports unless supervised by a librarian. You ask, carefully, about drafts. He doesn't flinch. It's not a scandalous subject. Laudanum is the era's elephant in the room tincture of opium, drifting through patent medicines and respectable prescriptions alike, and he admits that some patients do well with a tiny dose, properly measured, for a short spell. He doesn't push it. He prefers milder measures, bromide powders in water, hop pillows, the humbler herbs. Lettuce water you try. His mouth quivers at the edge of a smile. Harmless, he says, and if it gives the hands a task before bed, it may be better than many things that claim more. You imagine him writing that careful script marching across a prescription slip as the silver watch ticks approval. Historians still argue whether late Victorian nervous exhaustion, that catch-all diagnosis cousin to insomnia, was a cultural label pinned to ordinary stress, or a genuine medical category, masking many conditions under one fashionable name. The doctor, blissfully indifferent to future debates, calls it what his patients call it, overwork of the mind. Too much thinking at the wrong hours. A city that hurries your pulse, then leaves it unsupervised at midnight. He prescribes slowness like medicine, regular walks, dull reading, and conversation that does not aim to impress. Tonight counts. Then you can tick lamplighter and library chair under treatment modalities and move on. He opens a drawer and brings out a small bottle, a pale tonic, not as darkly tempting as laudanum, with a label that reads like a paragraph fallen on hard times. If you must, he says, a spoon at bedtime for a week. It smells faintly of orange peel and something metallic, the apothecary's signature, that penny taste. He also offers a sachet of dried hops and lavender, tied with thread, under the pillow, he suggests. Or near it. Not so close, the scent scolds you. You picture the sachets you passed earlier, the house exhaling calm into the fog, and you nod as if transferring a small piece of that air into your pocket. Then comes the part you half dread, the moral inventory disguised as practical advice. Do you work late? Do you quarrel after supper? Do you think while lying down? You do. You're very talented at it. He speaks of habits the way gardeners speak of soil, something to be tended, not scolded. You cannot pull sleep toward you, he says. You can only make the ground agreeable to it. So a fire banked low, a window cracked an inch, a hot brick wrapped in flannel at your feet, and no sudden cleverness after candle snuffing. He glances at the watch again, as if to confirm that cleverness has a curfew. A fringe tidbit slips out when he grows confidential. A patient of his swore by blue-tinted spectacles worn for an hour before bed to cool the nerves. He neither endorses nor condemns. He simply reports, the way naturalists report on eccentric birds. Another claimed that placing a cool cabbage leaf on the temples for 5 minutes drew off the fret. This one earns an audible sigh. If it helps, he concedes. It helps by declaring the night to be a sequence of small, boring tasks, which is not the worst strategy. You add it to the shelf in your mind where you keep the bell on the tea caddy and the railway nap affectionate, ridiculous, possibly useful. The consultation drifts, as the best ones do, toward ordinary things. He asks what you read when you aren't pretending to read about river dredging. You name a poet, then correct yourself too sparkling for late hours. He suggests something heavier in the hand and lighter in the mind, a dictionary, perhaps, opened at random, traveling from lettuce to letterpress to levity until your eyes surrender the alphabet. You consider proposing a pocket guide to railway timetables as a soporific, your private train carriage cure. But his look says he already knows that one. The fire sinks to a warm, red geometry. Shadows gather along the book spines and make a chorus line of rectangular silhouettes. He pours a small glass of water and sets it beside you. The soft clink, a reminder to slow down between sentences. You drink, and the metal thread in the water taste reminds you of the apothecary's measuring spoon, rows of bottles, the promise of rest printed in careful loops. Across the room, a fern unfurls toward the heat like a slow exhale. The watch ticks. The window fogs a little, clears itself, fogs again, a polite imitation of the city's breath. He writes a few lines and sands them with a twist of paper, the scratch making a friendly papery hush. You'll sleep, he says. Not as a guarantee, but as a weather report. Not perfectly, and not every night. But you'll learn the routes. You think of those routes, the lamplighters. From post to post. Your own. From fog to library to lavender. The way a chair can be an address and a cup a map. You consider the railway trick, riding to nowhere just for the sway. How the carriage rocks like a cradle and turns stations into lullabies you don't have to remember. Do you dream when you finally do? He asks. Curious. You tell him sometimes yes. And sometimes you dream that you're already asleep, a budget-friendly option. He almost smiles. Very efficient, he murmurs. We should all dream economies. There is room here for 3 soft jokes, and you oblige by letting them fall like feathers. You assure him you'll avoid stimulating literature after 10. Except perhaps the complete catalog of very boring things illustrated. You promise to have your tea intake unless the kettle begs for mercy first, and you admit that the library chair has threatened to report you to the authorities for loitering with eyelids. None of this disturbs the air. The room knows how to cushion a smile and let it glide toward the coals. He stands. And the watch flashes once in the lamplight. He presses the paper into your hand. Tidy orders for ordinary life, and the sachet of hops and lavender follows. A soft weight, like a pocket-sized evening. You tuck both away with the care you'd give a fragile ticket, the kind that will be checked by a conductor you respect. Outside, somewhere, a cart rattles and the street listens. At the door, he adds one last thing, a doctor's superstition dressed in kindness. When you lie down, thank the bed out loud, then be very boring for 2 minutes. It's not medical, it's ritual. It rhymes with everything you've been gathering tonight. Thank the bed, thank the chair, thank the lamplighter, thank the lettuce for trying. You step back into the hallway, past the bell that chimed you in, and let the watch's ticking linger in your ear like a metronome you can pocket. The fog greets you on the threshold, and the city's cool breath slides along your sleeve. You set off, a sachet in your pocket, a paper in your hand, and a modest plan in your mind. Walk steady, brew green, choose a book with the charisma of a brick. Crack the window just enough to argue with the fire, and if the night still resists, imagine the rails carrying you nowhere particular, their rhythm writing a letter to your eyelids in a script you don't need to read. The apothecary's shop sits at the end of a narrow lane, its windows bowed and glinting faintly under the lamplight. Hand-painted lettering flourished, but fading promises, tinctures, tonics, and trustworthy remedies. As you push the door, a little bell rings, the sound thin but clear enough to make the glass jars on the nearest shelf shiver almost imperceptibly. Inside, the air is an intricate tapestry of scents, dried herbs, a faint metallic tang from scales and spoons, the ghost of something sweet that might be licorice root, and underneath it all, the steady, waxy hum of old wooden drawers. The counter stretches ahead like a low stage, every inch behind it occupied by shelves stacked with glass bottles of every imaginable shape, cylinders, flasks, squat jars with cork stoppers, and tall, dignified decanters capped with glass globes. Labels, written in fine ink, march across them in neat rows: Sir, Papaver, Infuse, Humuli, Pulv, lacticari. The latter catches your attention. Yes, powdered lettuce extract, a cousin to that humble brew you've been chasing through the night. Mainstream medicine of the late Victorian period treated the apothecary as both a dispenser of physicians' orders and a respectable first stop for those unwilling or unable to pay for a doctor's visit. Sleeplessness was a familiar complaint, and the remedies offered ranged from the mild to the mildly alarming valerian drops in sugar water, bromide salts dissolved in warm milk, laudanum-laced syrups that could coax even the most stubborn mind into stillness at a cost. The man behind the counter wears an apron faded to the color of old parchment. He greets you in a voice that sounds as though it has been measuring out powders all its life unhurried, exact, never spilling a syllable. You mention your trouble with sleep, and he nods once, as though confirming a detail in a ledger. Without fuss, he begins collecting items: a brown glass bottle of syrup, a twist of paper holding dried hops, a smaller vial of pale blue liquid that catches the light like the inside of a seashell. The hops, he says, can be sewn into a pillow or steeped for tea. The syrup is gentle, though the sweetness may coat the tongue longer than the drowsiness coats the mind. And the blue tincture. He hesitates a beat, just enough to register before admitting it contains a trace of morphia for the very worst nights. It's meant for sparing use, he assures you, his eyes sharp enough to pierce any thought of turning that sparing into habit. Historians still argue whether apothecaries of the period leaned more toward the mercantile or the medicinal. Were they shopkeepers who happened to sell health, or healers who happened to run a shop in practice? The role blurred nightly, especially in matters of insomnia. A sleepless customer might leave with nothing more than a lavender sachet, or with a corked bottle that could quiet not only their own mind, but an entire house. If spilled into the tea, you drift along the shelves, fingertips brushing dusty glass. Here's a jar of lemon balm, faintly citrus even through the stopper. There, a row of tin boxes marked Herba passiflora passion flower. Another plant whispered to calm the nerves. You imagine the apothecary's ledger filled with tiny notations: the widow on Gresham Street, 2 ounces valerian root, the cab driver from Whitechapel, 4 nights running on lettuce water alone, now promoted to a hop pillow, the gentleman from Bloomsbury, requesting a refill on the blue but not meeting your eyes when he says it. On a high shelf, half hidden, you spot a ceramic jar painted with blue swirls. The label, in Latin, declares something to do with Caput papaverus poppy head. This is the stuff of the more dangerous drafts, the sort that turns sleep from an invitation into an edict. Fringe stories tell of night clerks who took such mixtures not to sleep, but to pass the long hours in a dreamlike drift while still at their posts. Whether true or not, the idea adds a faint chill to the warm, resin-scented air. The apothecary wraps your purchases in brown paper, folding each corner with care. His string ties are so precise they could hold a ship's sail in place. He slides the packet across the counter with a final nod, as though to say the cure is now your responsibility. You tuck it under your arm, feeling the slight shift of the glass inside, and wonder if the knowledge of having a remedy close at hand is part of its effect. Half the battle fought before the cork is even pulled. As you step toward the door, your eyes catch one last oddity, a dusty bottle, unlabeled except for a handwritten scrap tied to its neck. Only if desperate, you don't ask. Some mysteries sleep better untouched. The bell above the door rings again as you leave, its sound momentarily bright against the muffled street. The fog accepts you back without comment, curling gently around the paper parcel in your arms, somewhere down the lane. A lamplighter's ladder scrapes a post, and you picture the sachet of hops already tucked beneath a pillow, the syrup ready on the bedside table. The remedies feel heavier in your hand than their small size should allow, and you wonder whether that weight is glass or expectation. Ahead, the cobbles glisten, the night still young enough for wandering, but already folding in on itself, inviting you to carry these small, fragrant promises toward whatever bed waits at the end of your route. The fog shifts, and with it comes a low, rhythmic sound, the slow chuff of an engine cooling somewhere ahead. You follow it past shuttered shop fronts until the lane widens into a small station yard, its lamps glowing faintly behind a veil of mist. A single railway carriage sits on a siding, empty, but for a conductor who leans against the open door, cap tilted low. He doesn't challenge you as you approach, just gives the faintest nod as if to say, "You know what you're here for." Inside, the carriage smells of wood polish, wool, and the faint iron tang of the rails. The seats are upholstered in a dark pattern of florals that might have been cheerful once. Now they look like they've learned the art of understatement. You choose a corner, letting your back rest against the worn cushion, your legs stretching out toward the opposite seat. The air here is warmer than outside, and there's a quiet, almost expectant hum in the metal frame. The train gives a small lurch, just enough to feel like a breath, and then begins to move. No destination of consequence, just a slow loop through the outskirts. The kind of run meant more for shifting carriages than for passengers. The rhythm starts almost at once, wheels clicking over, joins in the track. The occasional groan as the frame flexes into a curve. Your body, without asking, begins to sink to it. Mainstream Victorian travel culture treated railway journeys as purposeful tools for commerce, commuting, or polite visiting, but there were always a few who saw the train as a moving bed. The gentle sway, the muffled landscape rolling past, the steady percussion of metal on metal, it was enough to unspool the tightest knot of thought. Historians still argue whether such nap rides were a genuine folk remedy or just a pleasant side effect of cheap tickets and unpoliced sidings. You let your gaze drift to the window. The glass fogs faintly with your breath, and beyond it, the night is awash of Gray's lamps flickering past, like half-forgotten dreams, buildings appearing and vanishing in the mist. Inside the carriage, the world has narrowed to the soft creak of upholstery and the muffled rumble beneath your feet. A fringe anecdote tells of certain insomniacs who bribed night guards to let them sit in stationary carriages, claiming the faint rocking, barely perceptible to anyone else, was enough to trick their bodies into sleep. Others took to riding late-night goods trains, sitting on crates or sacks of grain, swaddled in coats, letting the vibrations sift through them until thought became too cumbersome to hold. You picture the apothecary's customers trying this. Hop sachet tucked into a coat pocket, the rhythm of the rails massaging the tinctures into usefulness. The conductor strolls past, glancing at you without comment. His boots make a dull, pleasing thump on the wooden floor. You imagine him as a sort of night lamp lighter for the rails, tending to his moving posts, ensuring the small world of the carriage remains as it should, warm, lit, and gently swaying. Somewhere in the distance, a whistle sounds long and low, the audio equivalent of stretching before bed. You feel your shoulders loosen just hearing it. The train curves, and the shift of weight rocks you subtly against the seat back. The warmth in the carriage is steady now, like a hand pressed lightly between your shoulder blades. Your thoughts wander to the doctor's advice: regular hours. A fire banked low. Nothing clever after 10. This ride feels like a loophole in that rule: movement without effort, scenery without demand. The rails take responsibility for the night's progress, and you are merely cargo with a pulse. The carriage passes a darkened row of houses, their windows shuttered. You catch a whiff of coal smoke through a gap in the frame, and it folds neatly into the scent of wool and varnish inside. Somewhere between the two smells, you find a pocket of stillness. The click of the wheels becomes a kind of punctuation, regular, unhurried, marking the slow retreat of wakefulness. You close your eyes for a moment, not intending to sleep, just letting the sound do its work. Behind your lids, the rhythm becomes something like the library's pendulum, the lamplighter's ladder, the apothecary's careful rapping, all the night's patterns lined up and marching at the same pace. When you open your eyes again, the mist has thickened, and the lamps outside blur into streaks of pale gold. The train slows, not to stop, but to take a switch, the gentle jolt tugging you further toward drowsiness. The conductor reappears, settling into a seat across the aisle. He doesn't speak. He just tips his cap a little lower, as if to signal that conversation would be an act of vandalism here. You think about the lettuce water, still somewhere in your mental satchel, about the lavender sachets and the doctor's pocket watch, about the apothecary's unlabeled bottle marked only if desperate. They all seem far away now, replaced by the uncomplicated mechanics of movement. The train rolls. The carriage hums. The wheels speak in their soft, repetitive language. The journey could last another 10 minutes or another hour. You find you don't mind. For once, the measure of time has been outsourced. The rails will keep it for you. The rails fade behind you, replaced by the muffled quiet of cobblestones again. As you step off the siding, the fog seems to have thickened, curling closer, muffling even the faintest sound until a thread of music slips through. A fiddle, played soft enough to feel like a private thought, drifts over the square. You follow it without hurry, each note tugging you forward like a lazy tide. The source is a street musician tucked under the awning of a closed tobacconist. His case is open, though there's hardly anyone to notice it at this hour, and the coins inside are few. He plays not for the crowd, there is no crowd, but for the air itself, letting the melody wander without concern for beginning or end. The tune is slow, lilting, the sort that folds into the fog instead of cutting through it. Mainstream accounts of Victorian London often skip over these nighttime musicians, Yet they were there, buskers playing for workers on late shifts, for lovers lingering on their walks home, and for the city's restless, who stumbled upon them like lucky afterthoughts. The sound carried differently at night. The streets, emptied of traffic, became echo chambers where even a single violin could fill an entire block. You lean against a lamppost, its light thin and gold, listening as the fiddle loops a phrase again and again. The repetition works on you the way the train's rhythm did, subtle, steady, coaxing your pulse to match it. Historians still argue whether such simple looping music was a deliberate tool for calming the mind, or just the result of musicians playing the few tunes they knew by heart. Either way, in this moment, it serves its purpose. The musician glances up briefly, catching your eye without breaking the bow's path. You nod once, not applause exactly, but the shared recognition that this sound is the only conversation either of you needs. A fringe anecdote surfaces of a London fiddler who, legend says, would set up outside hospitals at night, claiming his playing could ease the turning of the mind for patients who couldn't sleep. Whether anyone believed him was beside the point. Enough nurses did to let him keep playing. The air smells faintly of rain that hasn't yet fallen. Somewhere down the street, a cat leaps from a wall, the soft thump barely registering against the music. You shift your weight, feeling the lampost's iron cool through your coat, and notice how the tune seems to absorb each small sound, the rustle of your sleeve, the shuffle of your boots, as though they'd always been part of it. It's the sort of melody that invites wandering thoughts. Yours drift back to the apothecary's shop, the hop sachet now in your pocket, and to the doctor's suggestion that nothing clever be read after 10. You imagine how this music would fare under that rule: not clever, but certainly not dull. It falls into that rare category of sound that asks nothing of you but your ears, and even they can half close without missing much. The bow slows, the notes lengthen, and you feel a subtle loosening in your shoulders. The tune pauses, not an end, just a space where silence has been invited in. The musician adjusts his grip, then starts again. Softer now, like a thought fading even as it's spoken. A carriage rolls by at the far edge of the square, the clip of its hooves perfectly timed to the music's tempo. The sound fades almost before you've noticed it. The fog, opportunistic as ever, steps in to fill the space. The coins in the case catch your eye again, glinting faintly. You add one not out of obligation, but as a way of anchoring yourself to this moment. The musician nods again, still playing, the gesture so small you almost miss it. You think of the lamplighter's nod, the conductor's tipped cap, how this night keeps handing you these quiet, wordless agreements. You stay until the tune winds down naturally, the bow resting at last. No applause, no farewell. You simply step away, the melody lingering like a scent on your coat, following you as you turn down the next street. The fog is thicker here, but the music remains in your head, looping once more before it fades into the city's steady breath. You turn into a narrow mews where the fog thins to a pearly breath, and, at last, a door opens onto the quiet geography you've been orbiting all night. A small bedroom, grate banked low, sheets folded back like a sigh, waiting to be released. The air is warmer here, carrying soot-softened heat and a faint trace of lavender, the same hush you followed earlier down that perfumed street. On the hearth sits a brick, the color of dried tea, wrapped in flannel and steaming delicately where the cloth is damp. Someone has thought ahead. Someone always does. You test the mattress with your palm firm in the middle, kinder at the edges, the quilt feather filled. The old kind settles around your wrist with the luxurious compliance of a sleepy cat. It smells faintly of clean air and line-dried sun. Even in the middle of the night, you lift a corner and feel the weight of it, a grounded heaviness that makes your ribs remember how to breathe slowly, whatever the debates over drafts and diets and tea counts. The feather quilt has an argument you can understand without a pamphlet. Here, lie down. On the mantel, the clock you've been hearing in every room tonight keeps time in gentle throat-clearing ticks. It's quieter here than in the library, less ceremonious. You think of the doctor's silver watch, how seriously it supervised your pulse, and of the apothecary's precise string knots. This room has their discipline, but softened by bed sheets and a promise that nothing terribly clever will be asked of you until morning. You slide the hot brick, cozily swaddled, to the foot of the bed, where it waits like a courteous footman. Mainstream domestic guides of the century praised just such a contrivance, bricks or stoneware foot warmers baked near the fire, wrapped in flannel, and tucked beneath the covers to preheat the bed. Earlier still, brass warming pans filled with embers would glide between sheets on winter nights, though more than one household discovered the line between warmth and scorch the hard way. You settle for the humble brick. It doesn't argue, doesn't singe, doesn't require a fire marshal with opinions. You drink a little water, the apothecary's clean. Metallic whisper lingering, and set the cup down. The feather quilt slides over your shoulders, heavy in the best sense, like a friendly paperweight pressed to restless pages. Historians still argue whether the Victorian habit of sealing windows tight against drafts, then sleeping under heaps of bedding, improved rest by cocooning bodies, or worsened it by turning bedrooms into airless terrariums. You hedge your bets. The sash is lifted a finger width, the curtain barely stirring, the room breathing as quietly as the city's fog outside. The hot brick gives off a slow, persuasive warmth that creeps through the sheets like ink through paper. Your feet relax first, then your calves' muscles untying knots you didn't know you'd tied during the lamplighter's route. The library chair's stern kindness is echoed here in another posture correction, not upright this time, but down, the mattress suggests, with firm Victorian reasonableness, that you might try yielding to gravity in a dignified manner. You oblige, rearranging limbs until the pillow molds itself to your ear like a conspirator. A fringe tidbit floats up from the night's pockets, an aunt's notebook sort of remedy about rubbing the warming brick with a little vinegar and salt to draw off the fret before wrapping it in flannel. Another variation replaces the vinegar with a spritz of lavender water so the heat rises with perfume. You half smile at the thought, an aromatherapy foot sauna for people who also believe in Bell-on-T caddy security systems and decide the brick, being a brick, will not object either way. You tuck your chin, down feathers tickle it like the softest joke. The quilt has that faint rustle, dry, papery, gentle, that makes you think of turning very thin pages. Somewhere beneath the sheet, the warm rectangle at your feet argues so persuasively for stillness that your toes sign a treaty with the rest of you. The city feels very far away, even though the fog is pressed like a face to the window. The lettuce water wanders into memory again, steam lifting in a green ribbon. You realize you don't need it now. Your ritual has been borrowed by the bed itself. Preparation has become the lullaby, the brick, the folded quilt, the window cracked to the proper moral degree. If the doctor were here, he'd make a note. Patient demonstrates promising talent for boring tasks at bedtime. You'd frame it on the wall between the library chair citation and the lamplighter's nod. There's a weight to the quilt that isn't just feathers. It's the collected patience of 1,000 nights. The way fabric remembers bodies and bodies. In turn, remember that being held even by a blanket melts sharp thoughts down to soft ones. You breathe and the quilt lifts a little, then settles, lifts, settles. The rhythm is the railways, minus the fare. The mattress hums its own inaudible lull. You think of the street musician, how his tune folded into the fog, and realize the bed is doing the same with your pulse, blurring edges until everything belongs to the same quiet key. From the hallway, a board creaks. The house answers with heat clicks in the pipe. No one is hushing you now. No attendant with a wake stick hovering at the edge of your dignity. You shift a shoulder. Feel the quilt pour around the curve of your arm like heavy cream. A small laugh tries to escape a feather jokes that it migrated all this way to keep your knee company, and you let the laugh stay inside, turned to warmth. Mainstream fact to tuck under the pillow with you by the late 19th century. Eider-down quilts had become a middle-class luxury, riding in with department stores and catalogs that promised civilized warmth without the coal bill. At the same time, stoneware hot water bottles and foot warmers were everywhere. Railway platforms sold them like talismans for long journeys, and bedrooms adopted them as quietly as slippers. You, honorary traveler of your own bed, have both in spirit the down to anchor you, the brick to persuade your circulation that bedtime has finally arrived. The clock's pendulum is unshowy but relentless. You let your breath match it for a dozen swings, then let the matching go. The window gives a faint click as the fog settles, and a ribbon of colder air sneaks across the floor toward the fire. The bed notices, tightens its borders, and everything inside the covers becomes a small republic of warmth defended by feathers. Another odd story bubbles up, one of those lightly attested tales that live in the margins of diaries. A gentleman who swore by tucking a baked potato at the foot of his bed as a warmer on travel nights, then eating it cold with salt at breakfast for continuity. You decide the brick is the nobler companion. Besides, you'd hate to negotiate a treaty between feathers and condiments. Still, you award the potato an honorary membership card to the Society of Ridiculous Things That Sometimes Work, right next to blue spectacles and cabbage leaf temples. Your hand slips out from under the quilt, testing the air like an envoy, then returns to the fold. The pressure of the covers flattens the day's leftover chatter. You can feel the deep pressure effect without needing the phrase. It's just the animal sense that weight equals safety. the way heavy curtains equal privacy, the way the lamplighter's routine equalized the city into a grid of calm. If the library was stillness supervised by furniture, this is stillness supervised by clouds that learned good posture. Historians still argue whether Victorians slept in segmented blocks: first sleep, waking hour, second sleep, or whether that pattern merely appears in records because the quiet hour in the middle produced letters and diaries, while the rest produced nothing but snores. You decide not to audition for the debate. If you wake, you'll wake. You have a hop sachet for company, and, failing that, a mental playlist of very dull paragraphs about river dredging. You might even thank the bed out loud, the way the doctor suggested, though you keep your gratitude to a whisper so as not to alarm the quilt. 3 small jokes drift past the edge of drowsiness like paper boats. You apologize to the brick for promoting it from construction to spa work without a pay rise. You promise the quilt you won't read anything more stimulating than a laundry list while you're under its supervision. And you pledge to write a polite letter to the lettuce tomorrow explaining that its services, while admirable, are surplus to requirements this evening. The boats bob once, twice, and dissolve into the warm tide. The feather edge at your neck tickles again, briefly, then settles. Your jaw unclenches. The room shrinks to the radius of your breath and the slow, confident heat at your feet. The city can keep its fog and its rails and its music for now. You've gathered their rhythms and pressed them into the bed like flowers in a dictionary. Somewhere far off, a cart creaks. Somewhere nearer, a coal shifts in the grate. The quilt remains. The brick keeps faith. The mattress has nothing left to prove. You don't so much fall asleep as allow sleep to be the simplest option in the room. Between one tick and the next, the bed writes its closing argument across your shoulders in feathered script. The brick signs it in warmth at your toes and your eyes. Ever polite. Accept the terms. The quilt's warmth is still on your shoulders when a sound nudges its way into the quiet, a bell, slow and deliberate, rolling out from somewhere beyond the bedroom walls. It's deep enough to hum in your ribs, the kind of tone that makes you think the air itself has mass. You turn your head slightly toward the window, where the fog is pale with the promise of a street lamp beyond, and let the sound unfold again, one heavy toll, then silence long enough to hear the faint shuffle of settling feathers in your pillow. The slow church bell is the city's heartbeat in these hours. Its pace is unhurried, the gaps between notes as full as the notes themselves. Mainstream Victorian life often took these bells as markers not just of time, but of mood. A midnight toll could mean a watch change, an hour to pray, or simply the church's mechanical devotion to its schedule. Some swore the deep resonance carried further in fog, as if the mist itself were a rope pulling the sound outward. Historians still argue whether bells at night were a comfort or a curse for the sleepless. Some found their constancy reassuring, a reliable reminder that time was still moving. Others dreaded each toll as proof that another hour had passed without rest. You listen and feel oddly suspended, neither comforted nor irritated, just pinned gently to the moment, as though the bell had rung directly into the mattress. You push the quilt back just enough to let cooler air graze your arm, and the faint smell of damp stone drifts in from the open sash. The scent carries the texture of the church itself, weathered blocks, centuries of rain polishing them into dark velvet, and the quiet drip of water from some unseen gutter. You imagine walking there now, past the heavy doors banded with iron, tracing your fingers along grooves carved by generations of hands. A fringe anecdote bubbles up, one you can't confirm, but can picture clearly, about certain parish churches leaving their doors unlocked all night, not for worship, but for the occasional wanderer who needed somewhere quiet to wait for morning. In theory, it was for travelers between coaches. In practice, it became an unofficial insomnia shelter. A pew, after all, is only a few steps removed from a library chair, and boredom in a warm, dim place has its uses. Another toll rolls through the air, the tone richer this time, as though the bell had taken a fuller breath. You imagine the bell rope swaying in the dim tower, the ringer's hands calloused from the pull, the sound sliding down the stone shaft and spilling out into the fog. Somewhere, someone else is hearing this same note, perhaps from under their own quilt, perhaps from the stoop of a public house closing its doors for the night. You sit up just enough to see the faint outline of the church tower through the window. The fog softens its edges, making it look older than it already is, like something remembered rather than observed. The bell sounds again, and this time you notice how the reverberation changes as it rolls between buildings, picking up a faint echo off the stone row houses before fading into nothing. The hot brick at your feet is still warm, though its heat has softened into something more like body temperature, less a device now, more a companion. You stretch your toes against it, thinking how the warmth and the bell share a rhythm slow, steady, inevitable. The quilt settles back into place as you lie down again, its weight smoothing over the air's chill. The bell strikes once more, and you picture it like a drop falling into a still pool, the ripples running out through the streets, touching window panes, drifting through curtains, finding every ear that happens to be awake. Somewhere, a street musician might pause in mid-bow to let the note pass. Somewhere, a lamplighter might rest a hand on his ladder and listen. You close your eyes and let the space between tolls expand in your mind until it feels like its own kind of timekeeping. If you count them, you'll be pulled into arithmetic. If you simply notice them, they become mile markers on a road you don't have to travel. The bell has taken over the pacing for you, just as the railway did, just as the library chair did. From the street, a carriage wheel crunches over loose gravel, then fades before the next toll arrives. The smell of damp stone grows fainter as the quilt traps your breath again. The bell rings once more its last for this hour, and the quiet that follows is not empty, but layered, holding the residue of sound the way the quilt holds warmth. 3 soft jokes slip through before you drift further. You tell the bell it's got impeccable timing, but questionable subtlety. You imagine the ringer filling out a timesheet marked only with still awake. And you promise yourself you'll never complain about alarm clocks again if they agree to ring at this exact drowsy pace. The silence after the final toll settles like dust in sunlight, so slow you hardly notice it landing. The city exhales. The bed resumes its argument for stillness. And somewhere in the dark tower, the bell hangs ready, patient as stone, waiting to start the next hour's conversation. The last bell note still hums faintly in your memory when a softer sound takes its place, a gentle crackle, irregular but friendly, from the hearth. The fire has been coaxed back to life, the coals glowing like a string of tiny planets in their own orbit, each one radiating a different shade of orange. Shadows flicker along the walls, and the light ripples over the quilt in warm waves. The smell is immediate coal smoke tempered by wood, with that faint mineral tang of ash. It's a scent that doesn't so much announce itself as settle into your clothes and hair, so you carry it with you even after you've left the room. The fire's voice is small, but it fills the quiet more intimately than the church bell, like someone whispering in a language you don't need to understand to find soothing. Mainstream Victorian homes often relied on these modest bedroom hearths during the coldest months, the steady glow helping to keep frost from the inside of the window panes. It wasn't about glamour, though some households managed ornate mantels. It was about creating a little island of comfort in a night that could be otherwise unkind. Historians still argue whether the psychological effect of a fire was as important as its physical warmth. But anyone who has sat in front of one at 3 in the morning will have their own settled opinion. Your gaze catches on a low stack of books to one side of the hearth. The top volume is thick, its spine unassuming, likely a history or perhaps a sermon collection. Beneath it, something smaller, bound in red cloth. You think of the doctor's advice against cleverness after 10, and how the right kind of dullness, paired with the right kind of warmth, can become a kind of sedative. A fringe anecdote comes to mind: households where a family member, often an older relative, would take the role of night reader, tasked with selecting the most soporific story possible. Not ghost stories to thrill, but ghost stories told so slowly and with such meandering detail that any suspense evaporated. A tale might begin with a haunted house, but detour into 3 pages about the genealogy of its former owners. And by the time the ghost arrived, everyone had already drifted into their own quieter realms. You imagine yourself now as that audience, the firelight providing the only punctuation. The flames, when they flare, stretch shadows up toward the ceiling beams. When they settle, the room seems to sigh and lean closer to the hearth. The crackle has a rhythm, irregular but looping, that you can half match to your breath without effort. The scent of coal takes you back to the street, to the lamplighters passing, and forward again to the apothecary's tidy jars. You can picture him here, wrapped in a shawl, reading aloud some patient account book until even the ink on the page yawns. In the far corner of your mind, the lettuce water is still steeping, the hop sachet still tucked under the pillow, the library chair still holding a space for you if you ever decide to go back. You reach toward the mantel, where a small brass poker rests against the grate. When you nudge a coal, it releases a brighter flare and a sharper crack like applause. If applause could be half asleep, the heat rolls outward, brushing your face before softening into the room. For a moment, you let your eyes blur, so the glowing coals become a kind of constellation you could name if you felt like moving your lips. The quilt on your lap feels heavier with the heat pooling beneath it, and the fire's light catches faint patterns in the fabric feather stitching that looks almost like little roads or rivers. The thought makes you smile inwardly. Even your blanket has a map, though its only destination is here. 3 gentle jokes drift in and out with the smoke you tell the fire. It's the only conversation partner you've ever had who warms you without interrupting. You promise the coals that you'll let them win the staring contest, and you consider charging admission to anyone who wants to see the midnight planetarium in your hearth. The crackle continues, slower now, as the fire begins to draw inward again. You can almost hear it folding up for the night, tucking itself into embers the way you've been tucking yourself into layers of quiet. Outside, the fog presses against the glass like it's curious about what's keeping you. The fire answers in its own way, low light, soft heat, a rhythm too gentle to measure. You rest your head back, the flames reflected faintly in your eyes, and let the warmth and the shadows agree between themselves about how long you'll stay awake. The story, whatever it was, can wait. The hearth is telling its own. You step out for a breath just to taste the night again after the hearth's honeyed warmth, and the fog greets you like an old acquaintance who never learned the art of boundaries. The street is a corridor of softened light where the lamps you followed earlier stand at polite attention. From around the corner comes a low murmur, the sound of conversation that isn't trying to be important. 2 men, voices padded with wool and lateness, the gentle cadence of people paid to be awake. And one more, like you, who simply is. They're gathered at a coffee stall that has unfolded itself onto the pavement, a brass urn breathing steam, a shelf of mugs clouded by use, a plate of buns that look heroic in their ordinariness. Night coffee stalls sprouted across Victorian London for workers and wanderers. Mainstream accounts note how they became little parliaments of the dark, places where constables, cabmen, and printers' boys compared notes under the same weak lamp. You drift closer, not to join, exactly, but to orbit heat on one side, fog on the other. A constable with a neat mustache taps the urn lightly with a spoon, a ritual as soothing as any you've practiced tonight. Beside him, a watchman turned lamplighter on his off nights. You recognize the latter leaning against the stall, warms his hands without complaint. The third man is a baker's assistant on a flour-dusted errand, eyelids heavy, but outwardly civil to the hour. Their talk isn't confidential, it's the woolen kind that's meant to pad the time between duties. You know the type like the library's silence, except it wears a hat. Cold the stallkeeper asks, rhetorical as a church bell. You nod, and he pours. The steam smells faintly of chicory and tin. The first sip startles you back into your body, hot, bittersweet, and you stand a little nearer to the urn, letting its metal breath unknot your shoulders. The constable is telling a story about a cat who has learned the beat. It trots precisely 1 lamp ahead of him at all times, like a furry metronome. The lamplighter counters with a report on a clock that's been 5 minutes fast for a decade. No one dares correct it now because the street has synchronized its habits to the lie. The baker, A philosopher of buns argues that a city only truly wakes when the first tray leaves the oven. Until then, these hours belong to the ones who are stubborn enough to collect them. You add, softly, that the hours also belong to lettuce water and library chairs, to hop pillows and trains that circle with no particular address. They smile in that tolerant way night workers smile when civilians confess their recipes for surrender. The lamplighter leans his elbow on the stand and asks if the lettuce works. You say that sometimes the ritual does the heavy lifting. Same with this. The stallkeeper says, polishing a mug's rim. It isn't the coffee, not mostly. It's the watching it pour. Historians still argue whether the rise of the Metropolitan Police after 1829 made the city's nights calmer or merely changed who kept the ledger of its wakefulness. Were the old parish watch and their rattles better for quiet streets? Or did uniformed constables turn Insomnia's wanderers into more cautious shadows? The men here shrug at history's question. Their version is simpler. Some nights are noisy. Some are soft as bread. And a good pair of boots outlasts both. A fringe tidbit surfaces in the talk half rumor, half lullaby about a particular beat, where the constable carries dried lavender in his pocket and will, if asked kindly, trade a sprig for a yawn. The lamplighter swears he's seen a cabman tuck such a sprig into his cap ribbon before a long, slow circuit to keep the temper cool. The baker suggests that tempers go where blood sugar leads them and offers a bun as evidence. You accept a small one, still warm at its heart, and find that proof tastes of nutmeg and resigned optimism. Someone asks what you were doing before the night claimed you. You list the harmless crimes letting a chair bore you into peace, walking behind a ladder until your thoughts lined up, buying the apothecary's packet because hope likes string. The constable nods at the last of these. People behave better when they have something wrapped in paper, he says. Makes them feel provisional, and provisional people tread lightly. The talk drifts toward what wakes people up. A milk cart too early, a dog who believes itself bound by maritime law to announce every foghorn 2 miles inland, a church bell that rings like it's trying to convince stone to sing. Then what settles them again? The weight of a quilt. A brick hot enough to negotiate with the feet. The slow stories that fold suspense into origami so tight it becomes a small square of silence. The lamplighter admits he sometimes reads the train timetables for pleasure. You confess that you took an actual ride and slept without realizing you'd tried. The constable, who prides himself on properly dull instincts, says that people who cannot sleep often walk in straight lines until the city makes them turn. When they do, he knows they're halfway home. It sounds like superstition, but you can feel the geometry of it, corners converting restlessness into right angles until the map grows tired of itself. He demonstrates with his spoon. Tap, tap, tap left. Tap, tap, tap right. The rhythm is almost comic. The spoon is a conductor's baton for a symphony of not much happening. A boy on a delivery bicycle breezes past, bell giving a single apologetic ding. The fog softens even that into kindness. Somewhere beyond the square, the faintest fiddle note tries the air and then thinks better of it. The stallkeeper sets an extra mug upside down on the counter for luck. which you suspect is code for the next person who needs to belong to somewhere for 5 minutes. Mainstream fact the constable supplies. Tapping the spoon to underline it by the 1860s, London's coffee stalls became quasi-institutions of the late shift. Their licenses debated, their hours tolerated, their clientele cataloged in newspapers that loved to marvel at the democracy of steam. The lamplighter adds, not without pride, that he remembers when this very stall moved 2 lamps north to catch a better draft for the urn. The baker considers the ethics of bun distribution by latitude, deems them sound, and breaks one in half like a blessing. 3 soft jokes tumble in and out with the steam. You suggest the city should issue official certificates in advanced boredom techniques to anyone who can stay awake through a parliamentary report without changing expression. The lamplighter proposes a union rate for nodding politely at windows that clearly intend to stay awake out of spite. The baker offers to name a bun after Insomnia, a ring-shaped pastry called the O of No, but only if it sells before dawn. You'd stay here longer if the bed you left weren't quietly tugging at your sleeve. The stall-keeper reads the tilt of your shoulders the way librarians read the tilt of a drowsy head. He refills your mug only halfway, a gesture that says, "This is goodbye tea, not a new beginning." The constable straightens his belt and marks the edge of the fog with his spoon, as if drawing a line no one needs to cross. The lamplighter adjusts his ladder, instinctively counting posts you cannot see. The baker tightens the string around an invisible parcel and wishes you the kind of sleep that arrives without bragging about itself. Before you go, the constable offers a little superstition disguised as procedure if you wake before you mean to, and the bell has not yet confessed the hour. Tell the room your name and occupation aloud. Then list 3 boring truths. How many steps to the kettle? How many spoons in the drawer? How many lamps to your door? Call the world to witness, he says, and the world may agree to keep its voice down. It's not in any manual, but it belongs with the doctor's advice and the apothecary's string, with the train's sway and the chair's sternness, with the lavender that waits like a sentence ending in a period instead of a question mark. Historians still argue whether the city's late conversation, this gossip of boots and steam and watchful eyes, made sleeplessness feel communal or merely visible. Were the coffee stalls islands of mercy or markets for fatigue? Did night patrols cradle a gentler quiet or frame the dark so sharply that the wakeful saw themselves outlined by it? The men at the stall would shrug again. You suspect, and let the urn answer in vapor, sometimes one, sometimes the other. Always better with something warm in your hands. You say your good nights to people who never say good night, because it isn't their shift to. The lamplighter gives you that steadying nod, the one you've been collecting, and hoists his ladder into the fog. The constable resumes a pace you could time by teaspoon. The baker stows his buns against the coming dawn. You turn toward your street, the one with the cracked sash and the quilt that weighs like a gentle argument, and carry the stall's talk with you, the way you carry the coal sweet of the hearth or the faint green of the lettuce brew, not as proof, not as cure, but as warmth. The fog is kind enough to part a little, showing you 2 lamps and a door you recognize. Your key sounds like a small bell in the lock. Inside, The room welcomes you as if you never left brick, still warm at the foot. Pillow keeping your place as a bookmark keeps a page. You set the cup down, peel back the quilt's sleepy geography, and tell the bed, softly. 3 boring truths you learned at a coffee stall. There are 5 spoons in the drawer, 6 steps to the kettle, 17 lamps between here and the corner where the men talked as if time had no sharp corners at all. The bed accepts this inventory like a sworn statement, and your lids, law-abiding, suddenly comply. Outside, somewhere, the stall-keeper flips the upside-down mug, filling it for the next wanderer. Somewhere, the lamplighter tick-marks another post. Somewhere, the constable measures a straight line until the street makes him turn. You turn only once onto your side. Into the hollow, your shoulder left. The quilt completes the sentence for you. The brick adds its period. And the room closes its file on the night with a sound like a page laid gently face down. The first sound is a soft rattle, almost apologetic metal on metal, wooden wheels finding the familiar grooves of wet stone. You blink into the gray, that color the sky keeps just before it becomes anything else. And you know without rising that the milk cart is turning your corner. The quilt still holds your warmth. The hot brick at your feet is a memory of heat now, a quiet ember of intention. You listen. The cart's steady roll is the friendliest argument you've heard all night for lying very still. You picture it even before the window admits the shape, a handcart with tall, spoked wheels, a boy or woman at the handles, bottles clinking softly against one another like cautious cheers. The fog carries the sound in a narrow ribbon, more intimate than the church bell, less insistent than the watch's tick. Mainstream accounts agree that milk arrived early in Victorian London, sometimes before dawn had opinions carried by milkmaids and carters who knew the city's sleeping pulse by heart. They moved along routes as practiced as a lamplighters, doling out a morning that hadn't quite learned to be morning yet. The cart halts. A stopper pulled from sound. A measure clinks into a pail. A gate latch answers with an old cough. The faintest splash lands like punctuation. You can almost smell it, the clean, faintly grassy sweetness of fresh milk, shouldering into the coal and lavender and candle smoke that have made the night their home. The street gives a small shiver as a door opens and closes. You stay under the quilt, but a smile finds your mouth anyway. These are the footsteps of a city returning to itself. Historians still argue whether the dawn's gray light improved the sleepless by promising an end, or worsened them by proving how long they had kept vigil. They also quarrel, in the way historians do politely, about whether industrial dawns wedged between gaslight and factory hooters reshaped circadian habits or merely revealed the ones people already had. From your pillow. Public debate is a distant parliament. Here, the milk cart is the only vote that matters, and it votes for soon. A fringe story you once heard says certain carters would hum the same tune on every street, a low thread of song to announce themselves to scullery maids and cats with excellent ears. Some households swore that melody worked better than any knock by the second bar. Aprons were tied, doors were opened, and kettles were dared to be quick. Perhaps it's nonsense, like blue spectacles and cabbage leaf temples. Perhaps it's true, the way small rituals are true. They make meaning where you can use it. You roll onto your side, letting the feather quilt pour round your shoulder with its soft, papery hush. The sash is still open, that polite finger width the doctor would approve. A little river of air flows over the sill, cool enough to make the pillow feel generous. You thank the bed out loud, very quietly, because you promised you would. It receives the gratitude like an old friend who doesn't need a hug to know it's welcome. Outside, the cart resumes, a lullaby on wheels. The rhythm folds into the library's hush. The lamplighters climb. The trains sway. The musicians looping phrase. The church bells slow toll. The coffee stall's breath of steam. Every pattern you've gathered turns out to be the same pattern, wearing different hats, repetition without demand. You think of lettuce water steam rising in a green ribbon, harmless as a prayer. You think of the apothecary's careful string ties and the bottle labeled only if desperate, blessedly still corked. You think of the doctor's silver watch, counting both kinds of time, the useful minutes and the kind that simply soften. A bird tries out a single note, audacious, early, not sorry about it, and the fog edits it down to a suggestion. Somewhere, a shutter lifts and considers the day like a person peeking from under a quilt. Somewhere, boots remember where they live. But here, in this small republic of sheets and breath, nothing is required of you but staying. Mainstream fact to tuck beside you by the 1870s. London fretted about milk purity enough to test and tax and regulate, printing scolding articles about chalk and water. The morning clink of bottles carried both promise and caution. You file that beside your earlier vows to avoid cleverness after 10. The world is complicated, even when it's gentle. Still, the sound is innocent in your ear. It's just glass agreeing with glass that the night has been long enough. The cart hits a shallow puddle. The splash is a yawn in liquid form. You breathe with it, in slow committee, with everything that has argued for rest tonight. 3 small jokes present themselves like late guests who know they're forgiven. You consider petitioning the city to certify the milk cart as an official metronome. You vow to count bottles instead of sheep, but quit at 2 out of sheer professionalism. You promise your pillow you'll file a report on the beneficial effects of watching nothing happen very carefully. You imagine the lamplighter now, finishing his circuit while the milk begins its own, the baton passed from flame to bottle with no one quite needing to clap. You imagine the constable touching his spoon against the edge of dawn, satisfied that straight lines have once again turned themselves into corners. You imagine the baker sliding a tray into heat, the buns rising like very small sunrises. You stay where you are. Your contribution to the city's industry will be to reduce the volume of your breathing until it hums in the register of sleep. The cart's sound thins with distance, the way a thought thins when it decides not to be a worry after all. The gray outside your window brightens by one hardly noticeable shade, then another. Your eyelids answer with their least dramatic trick. They simply agree. The brick at your feet is lukewarm, which is the exact temperature of surrender. The quilt is heavier than reason. The pillow has lines you don't remember choosing and will happily not remember again. There will be morning soon. There will be tea measured by spoons you can count without counting. There will be letters and ledgers and the library if you want it. and maybe a train that rocks you for an hour under an honest pretense. There will be lavender if the evening asks nicely. But this moment belongs to the last quiet office of the night, the clerk with the slowest pen signing your mind out of its shift. You breathe in, tasting the cool thread of air above the sash. You breathe out, and the quilt answers by settling a fraction deeper. The milk cart turns a farther corner that you cannot see, and for once you do not follow. You let the city walk the final yards without you, because it knows the route, and because you finally do too. Let everything lengthen now, like shadows when the lamp is turned low. Let the sentence lines stretch out softly until they forget where they meant to end. The room is quiet. The air is cool at the window and warm beneath the covers. Your breath is easy, unhurried, content to be counted by no one. The night, which has been such polite company, steps back a little and lets the quilt finish the story. Each sound you gathered fades into a distant room tone, the library's paper hush, the lamplighter's careful ladder, the apothecary's glass whisper, the train's low percussion, the fiddle's circling phrase, the church bell's measured patience, the stall's sleepy steam, the milk cart's soft confession of arrival. They recede to a thin silver line, and then to nothing at all. Even your thoughts put down their parcels and sit with folded hands, as if waiting for a name to be called that never is. The pillow lifts gently as you inhale, settles gently as you exhale, and everything inside the radius of the quilt belongs to the safe. Quiet wait of now. No errands, no clocks, only the small warmth at your feet, the steady softness at your cheek, the window breathing on your behalf. If there is a worry, it is a pebble at the bottom of a pond, and the surface above it is perfectly still. Words slow. Light dims. The room becomes a place made of calm edges and soft corners, where nothing sharp is allowed to enter. You can rest here. You can drift here. You can let this moment loosen into the next, and the next, and the next, until time is just the comfortable seam between one breath and the one after. If your eyes are not yet closed, they will be soon, and they will close the way doors close in well-tended houses quietly, and with the certainty that everything needed is already inside.